Hello and welcome. My name is Zafar Iqbal, and you are watching the Mojo Story. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just completed his high profile visit to the US, holding talks with President Trump. Now, key takeaways are a new defense framework, plans for India to import more US oil, and potential future sales of F 35 fighter jets. Now, trade tensions were addressed with Trump imposing reciprocal tariffs and citing past issues like Harley Davidson struggles in India. Trump also approved the extradition of 2611 accused Tahawwur Rana and commented on India's strained relation with the Biden administration. You can see on that screen uh, that hug between Modi and Trump. There were warm exchanges, a press conference also that was followed, in which all those details were put out. Prime Minister Modi telling President Trump that he keeps national interest first, and so does Modi in India. He also met with Elon Musk. Before that, he had several other meetings also that took place. And finally, he met with President Trump, and then all those talks took place. To discuss this, we're joined by an eminent panel. We're joined by Michael Kugelman. Uh, Welcome to Mojo Story, Michael. He's the director, South Asia Institute, the Wilson Center. We're also joined by Spencer Critchley, author and political commentator. Welcome to Mojo Story, sir. And from India, we're joined by Arnab Ray, author and columnist. If I may start with you, Michael, how do you assess the trajectory of US India relations? Has Washington's stance fundamentally changed with India now, or it is the same policy that carried forward? Why I'm asking, because Trump did indicate that India did not have a good equation with the Biden administration.
Yeah, thanks for having me. No, I think that the U.S.-India relationship has been enjoying exponential growth for the last few decades, and indeed during the Biden administration, particularly during the last few years, there were some tension points that cropped up, and I think that really exploded to the surface when the ruling party issued some very striking statements that essentially accused the U.S. deep state of being behind efforts to destabilize India. But on the whole, the relationship was in a good place, and I think that that'll be the case in Trump 2.0 as well. I mean, the Trump administration really made quite clear to India how important it views the relationship, not only with India but with Modi specifically. I mean, the fact that Modi, of course, was only the fourth foreign leader to meet President Trump, and I would argue that he had much more access to Washington than the three leaders before him. Of course, he met not only with Trump, but with a number of very senior Trump officials and confidants. I think nearly half a dozen of them altogether, as I understand it. And I think that the message from the administration is it's really keen to work with India to take the partnership forward. And the what we heard in the press statement, and what I presume we'll see in the joint statement when it's made available, is that there are a number of initiatives that they plan to roll out, including this new defense framework, plans to negotiate a new trade deal. Given that the Trump administration's only been in office for 3 weeks, this is a lot. This is pretty ambitious, and I think that's a good sign for the relationship.
Right, absolutely. Uh, the fact is also that the US has frequently raised concerns over India's trade policies. That was one of the focal points of Donald Trump. In fact, the reciprocal tariffs. And he also said that India is top in that list of countries. Uh, and he started his press conference by saying that India will buy more oil from the US. Do you think that these issues are still a sticking point? There were tough negotiations that were done regarding tariffs.
Yeah, so I mean, as you know, during the first Trump administration, trade was a tension point, and indeed, the Trump administration imposed new tariffs, and so you actually had a mini trade war between the U.S. and India back then. But if you look at if you look at the pattern of U.S.-India trade in recent years, India has been importing increasing amounts of American oil, particularly if you measure it through dollar amounts and dollar values. We're talking about petroleum. The very types of products that Trump is pushing India to import more of. It's already been doing that. So I don't
Yeah,
know if it's a good or bad thing from India's perspective, but I would argue that to this point, New Delhi has done all the right things in the sense that it's made very clear that it's willing to make concessions to Trump on tariff issues, and not only that, but on importing American oil and indeed taking back undocumented Indian immigrants. And for an Indian
yeah,
government that projects itself as very strong, confident, nationalistic, for it to go out of
yeah,
its way to make
yeah.
these concessions to the Trump administration says something about how much it wants this relationship to work.
Absolutely. If I may ask you, Spencer, Michael spoke about the immigrants who are not registered, they are illegal immigrants. And recently we had a plane load of immigrants, 104 Indian illegal immigrants who were brought from US to India. They were handcuffed, chained, and shackled, and that video was released by the US then. There was an inherent messaging in that because they were brought on a military aircraft, and then it happened days after President Trump took over. Uh, some said at that point in time that the messaging is not good, given the fact that Prime Minister Modi is flying to the US on the issue of tariffs. Of course, there is clarity, but what about the illegal immigrants? US has been focusing on that they should be taken back, and India says that we'll take them back, but it's not so simple. The perceptions vary, and they run in thousands and thousands of immigrants in the US.
Yes, and I think the release of the video is the crucial point there. I can completely understand why so many Indians were so offended by that. One can talk about it being standard practice to put deportees in shackles. One can argue about the use of a military plane. I think the symbolism there is bad. The release of the video, I think, is terrible and undoubtedly deliberate and intended to please the segment of Trump's base that is excited by racism, frankly. The whole focus on the supposed invasion of the United States by immigrants, and it's always immigrants who have dark skin, is a classic demagogic technique, and Donald Trump is a classic demagogue. He excites fear, resentment, and hatred targeted at foreign others or domestic others,
Yeah,
reinvents them as enemies, and the point is to distract your population from your true objectives by having them focused on, in this case, a scary monster. The technique is always, shiny toy or scary monster, but the point of it is always distraction. I found that obviously offensive to Indians, but offensive to all people, and deeply embarrassing as an American, because it's such a betrayal of fundamental American values. If anything makes America great, it's that America is a nation of immigrants and that we're founded on principles of individual freedom and equality, which we have not always lived up to, but which are intended to apply to everybody. And I think it's shameful.
right. And we don't know how many more illegal immigrants will be sent back. It could just be the first lot. But coming to you, Arnab, one of the important things that was announced by President Trump was the extradition of Tahawwur Rana, one of the key figures in the Mumbai terror attack. Do you think that is the biggest takeaway? Because India has been insisting that he should be sent to India, and now everything is clear on that count. That will be the biggest takeaway for Prime Minister Modi to bring back home his image, his strong image of bringing all those people who are perpetrators of terrorism to India to face the trial, to face the courts.
Hi. So first of all, thank you for having me on the show. So just a small point of clarification: I'm actually not in India. I'm an immigrant in the US.
Right, right.
I'm right
Yeah,
now in Los Angeles.
yeah.
So with respect to Tahawwur Rana, I think the point of Trump's racism was brought up by the previous panelist. But what needs to be brought up is the racism of his previous predecessor, which is Biden. So there are two kinds of racism that, when I've stayed in this country for 20 years, so I've seen both. One is the explicit racism of seeing brown people in chains. But then there's the other racism that brown people are not able to take care of their own country and they need to be patronized, which is why somebody like Tahawwur Rana would not be sent back to India, because obviously that's not a civilized place, so we will keep him in the US. This was evident in what I found was perhaps the most insulting thing that the Biden government did, was that a national was allowed to make, essentially, we know what happened with Canada and with America ganging up against India, essentially saying that India does not have the right to take out terrorists in other soils, where they're being sheltered. Absolutely, they're being sheltered in Canada. It is a right that India does not have, but it's a right that Canada and the US has. And so these kind of things, I think, are even more racist than you can rationalize that the people who were shown in chains had actually broken the law in a way. So they had broken US's law, but the same thing applies. The same privilege should be given to Indians. So Democrats, I've consistently seen, have this almost implied racism. It's so implied and it's so ingrained in them that they don't even realize it, but it permeates through their policy. And that is why I think that a Republican administration is always better towards India, because they at least treat Indians as equals, India as an equal. And I'm not saying that there is not a fundamental rail of racism going through the Republicans and Trump too. There is undeniable, but it's a different kind of racism. And maybe, as I'd like to say, that it's bad for Indians in the US, but it's good for Indians in India.
Right. Let's in fact hear what was said about the deportation of Tahawwur Rana. Okay, do we have that soundbite up? Okay, there's just making that soundbite. But Michael, you know, it is also very important, when Donald Trump swearing in ceremony took place. We saw a video was made by Gurpatwan Singh Pannu. He made that propaganda video. He shot himself saying Khalistan Zindabad slogans and released them. Now, India has been saying that Gurpatwan Singh Pannu is a designated terrorist. He has been making threats against Indians, threats of blowing up aircrafts and glorifying the killers of a former prime minister. On one hand, that Tahawwur Rana will be sent back, but what about those who are freely roaming in US and Canada, particularly Gurpatwan Singh Pannu, who is in the US?
The
If you can
press,
unmute, yeah, yeah.
sorry, 2 times during the joint press conference, Trump was asked about his view on Khalistanis, and he didn't really answer either time. But it's interesting that I think many in India are hoping that Trump will take a very different position on this issue than the Biden administration did, hoping that Trump would sympathize with the views of many in India that these Khalistani supporters in the U.S. are essentially terrorists, or they pose a terrorist threat or a terrorist-like threat. That might be true, but I would also argue that looking at the Panun case, I think that given Trump's politics, he projects himself as a nationalist, as an American nationalist. I think that he would not take lightly the very serious allegations in the indictment related to the Panun case, essentially alleging that India's government was involved in a very serious breach of U.S. sovereignty, and it happened allegedly in New York City, Trump's hometown, and so on. So I don't necessarily think that Trump is going to want to let that investigation go, though I will say that some of the things we saw with the Biden administration, such as, some Khalistan supporters meeting with officials at the White House, I don't think that type of thing will play out in the Trump administration. But on the Panun case specifically, I don't think that you're going to see Trump try to put an end to that investigation, keeping in mind as well that a prominent Sikh activist, Harmeet Dillon, was nominated by Trump to be the head of the civil rights department at the Department of Justice. So that's a very interesting pick for sure.
Right. Interesting dynamics playing out there. But let's first hear what was said about Rana.
I'm pleased to announce that my administration has approved the extradition of one of the plotters and one of the very evil people of the world, and having to do with the horrific 2008 Mumbai terrorist attack, to face justice in India. So he's going to be going back to India to face justice as we deepen our defense.
Spencer, how significant do you think this statement is, given that it's been years now, and now finally he will be sent to India? Do you think it's extremely significant that Prime Minister Modi has managed to get Tahawwur Rana back to India after so many years?
Normally, I might think so, but I doubt very much if Donald Trump knew who he was talking about even an hour before he made that statement. He's so transactional and has such a shallow knowledge of issues generally. I'm sure when he was asked questions about Khalistan, he would be drawing a blank on what was being talked about unless somebody thought to give him some kind of quick briefing before that press event, but he's famously resistant to being briefed. I understand the significance to India, of course, and I understand India's sensitivities about having its own national sovereignty respected. But I would argue that it's not necessarily a sign of disrespect to hold India to the same standards that America tries to hold itself to. And those standards do include, as Michael said, the need to defend national sovereignty and the need to observe American laws, which provide a great deal of latitude for free speech, often more latitude than is allowed even in other advanced democracies. And so America needs to stand up for its own values the same way India stands up for its values. And I think if you have a genuine peer-to-peer relationship, it's possible to stand up for your own values without disrespecting your partner nations. And often, as I say, when it's a genuine peer-to-peer relationship, it's a sign of respect to be frank about these things. And I think it's actually kind of paternalistic to be afraid of offending somebody's feelings and thereby feeling like you have to, in effect, talk down to them.
Right. There were many things that were asked in that press conference. One thing that I noticed was that Prime Minister Modi said that we are not neutral. That was an important statement that he made, that we are not neutral. We are on the side of peace when it came to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There are lots of talks that were going in the past that what role can India play, and can India play a role, given that Prime Minister Modi has good terms with Putin. He's spoken to the Ukrainian leader, and he met with President Trump. Arnab, if I may put this to you, do you think that India has any role there?
No, that's the honest answer. So the first thing that you have to understand is that, of course, Trump's knowledge of everything he talked about was extremely shallow. He's not interested in these things at all. What he's interested in, the pathology of him, is the classic monarch. He expects, if you remember the stories we used to read, that when the emperor came to power, kings from distant lands came and bent their knees and gave royalty, said, and he blessed them and he gave them some gift. It's the exact same thing. So I doubt that Trump has any idea of anything he said today. So we should be very careful about digging too deep into this deeper significance. What happened, the way I understand it, is that Modi went, he was given a lot of access because Trump's current administration, the people who are actually running it, there are a lot of very pro-India people there. Whether it is Vivek, whether it is Elon also in a way. There are certain things that Elon is perhaps not pro-India, but there are certain things he is pro-India on. With Trump, it is all about kissing the ring. And that India is, we are also used to dealing with strong men, right? So this is not something which is foreign to us. So we should all, whenever we shouldn't overemphasize or overinterpret anything we heard or saw today. There's one point that I would like to make in passing with respect to what the previous commentator said with respect to freedom of speech. In the US, Panu made a threat to kill the Indian Prime Minister. So it was not a question of freedom of speech. If in the US, somebody makes a threat on video to kill the US president, that is not covered under First Amendment rights. So again, this false argument that is often made by Democrats that this is our standards. No, it's not your standards. You cannot make a death threat against a death threat. He made an absolute death threat to our prime minister, and that is an act of terror. Yes, and the US wouldn't allow that anybody else to do it. By the way, when they killed Osama, it was in another foreign nation. In case you forget,
Right.
an ally.
Right. There were so many things that in that press conference, one of the things that Prime Minister Modi said that, Spencer, you want to come in?
Say, I would agree, and I can't claim intimate familiarity with this particular case, and I would agree that if somebody is making credible threats and clearly intends to act on them, the United States should be very cooperative with a foreign government in extraditing that person. But I do think that it does get more complicated in the American context, where you actually can say really terrible things about the president, including things like you wish they would die, and that sort of thing. And people are constantly having to judge amidst all of the threats coming in towards the president and other prominent politicians. Was this actually an intent to do harm? And that's where it crosses the line. So again, in the United States, there really is a great deal of latitude there. But I do accept the point that if there is a credible threat and it seems clear there's an intention to act on it, then there needs to be cooperation.
Right.
To just respond to that is that this is an organization which has killed an Indian prime minister before. So it is not a random threat being made by a comedian or anything. It is a person who represents an organization who has killed an Indian prime minister before, and they're making this threat. So this is as credible as a threat as can be.
Right. So that is an important issue, the issue of Khalistan. That has become rather a big issue for India in the last couple of years, since Prime Minister Trudeau stood up in his parliament and said that agents of the government of India are responsible for killing Niger, and then the Panun case came up. So that is an important issue out here. But Michael, another thing that struck me was that Prime Minister Modi said that while the focus of President Trump is to make America great again, he also his focus is also to make India great again. And he said that while President Trump puts the national interest of America first, so does Prime Minister Modi when it comes to India. How do you see those exchanges that took place?
Well, I think this is a case of Modi trying to amplify this friendship between the two men, that they see things in similar ways. And this is, Trump said similar things about Modi. I mean, they each lavished a lot of praise on each other. It wasn't just Modi lavishing, they're both lavishing a lot of praise on each other. And I think that was one of the goals of this summit, was for two men who have a pretty long relationship when it comes to world leaders. I mean, they've known each other for nearly a decade. They first met in 2017 when Modi made his first visit to visit Trump. That's the first time they met. And it's been cultivated since then. So they wanted to reassert that. So, they're looking to lavish praise on each other. But I think it does get to an interesting question. Is there a fundamental disconnect between Buy America, make in America versus make in India. And there might be, though I would argue that it's surmountable in the sense that India has made very clear that it is willing to embrace the Buy America idea by importing more American energy and so on. And then if you look at the other side, American investors have been deploying capital in India on pretty significant levels in recent years. And so even if the US government wants Americans to be looking to other countries to buy more from the US, the private sector in the US is going to continue to engage in investment inside India. And I don't think that the Trump administration is going to try to curtail that or limit that. Now, certainly, if you look at the top areas for U.S. investment in India in recent years, they include things like tech, pharmaceuticals, also clean energy. Clean energy may be an area that the Trump administration would not be very keen for private investors to invest in. But again, we're talking about the U.S. private sector, and I don't think that you're going to see much concern from the Trump administration, particularly given that, as was noted before, the Trump administration is filled with robust champions of partnership with India. So if they see Americans doing anything to strengthen partnership with India, they're going to be okay with that.
Right. And Spencer, with AI, semiconductors, and emerging tech sectors becoming a battleground of global influence, how do you see US-India cooperation evolving in these areas?
Well, that's an interesting question, because you're talking about two very high value-added industries. And I think, again, as Michael was just pointing out, there's potential for tension there when you have two economic nationalists who want to sell and don't necessarily want to buy. I think that describes Trump in particular, of course. And where that's to a country's advantage is when, at least an advanced economy, is when they're making high value-added products or services like AI, for example, or other high-tech products and services. It's actually now I'm no economist, but based on my understanding of economics, it can actually be to a country's advantage, again, an advanced economy like the United States, to have a trade deficit with some other countries if they're buying products that can be made more cheaply or better or both in the other country. Then that frees up money in your country to invest in higher value-added activities and to build jobs in those sectors instead of low value-add ones. So this is one where I think the objectives of Prime Minister Modi and President Trump could conflict. I would have to say, although I do not approve of everything Prime Minister Modi does, I would say I consider him to be a far more sophisticated thinker than our president, I'm sorry to say, who tends to get fixed ideas in his head, like the idea that trade deficits are always bad, or tariffs are always good, or that it makes sense to put reciprocal tariffs on every trading partner you have all at the same time. But yeah, in that area, I think there's likely to be some tension.
Yes, and that those defense sales might actually reduce that trade deficit. But with increasing military sales and defense cooperation, is India becoming truly a strategic partner of the US, or still viewed as a counterbalance to China, rather than a genuinely true partner?
I think we've reached the stage where most serious foreign policy analysts don't see us as a counterbalance to China, because we are not. We should neither be hyphenated with Pakistan, because we are way stronger, nor should we be hyphenated with China, because they're way stronger. So we are somewhere in the middle, and we are neither a counter, because most of our foreign policy focus in the 90s, till the 90s, was Pakistan. Now it's China. For US, especially for the current administration, at least to me, it's not very clear whether they are enemies of China or whether they're really friends of China, or whether they're using the bluster of being anti-China as a bargaining tack to get something out of China. Because one of the big developments in the US, I would say, and it's not that the Democratic administration was not allied with industry, but this is more allied, and that's why the word oligarchy has been used. Maybe it's a little extreme of a term, but it's not without any basis. So the fact is that the US government is perhaps more pro-business. And for us in India, where we know that the Ambani Adanis, this might not be a news, but in the US, this is that many of the plays that are currently being made in the 3 weeks this is something which I feel is essentially people, and Trump is not the person, he's the people behind him who are making these moves to foray into different markets that have hitherto been closed, using tariffs and some of Trump's bluster as a bargaining chip to get the actual things done. So don't trust everything that comes out as the truth. There are many things behind it.
Right. Michael, we're coming to the end of our discussion. I wanted to ask about this visa restrictions. US has always acted as a major destination for Indian professionals. How do you view these American politics influencing, immigration policies towards India?
Well, the H-1B visa issue is not new. I mean, it's been in the news in recent months, but this is something that's been a bit of a flashpoint, not just for U.S.-India relations, but also in U.S. Politics, U.S. domestic politics, for quite some time. But I think that here, this really is going to come down to dynamics within American politics. As you know, the president himself and some of those close to him, like Elon Musk, have supported H-1B visas, but then you've got some influential folks close to him that have been highly critical of them. And I think this is something to watch, not just as an issue of visas, but more broadly an issue that could impact different aspects of U.S.-India relations, particularly tech cooperation, which during the Biden years had emerged as one of the fastest growing spaces for partnership. If you do start curbing the H-1B visa program, that means you're going to have fewer Indian tech workers in the United States, presumably, and that could impact U.S.-India tech relations in a big way. Tech cooperation is something that the two sides appear keen to continue doing, based on what was said during the press conference after the summit on Thursday. So, it's hard to see what direction this will take, the H-1B visa issue will take, but it's certainly something to watch, just because it has a very strong bearing on the broader partnership.
Right. And Spencer, how do you, in conclusion, see this moving forward? There are expectations from both the countries. Prime Minister Modi met with President Trump. They discussed many things. How do you see going here on?
Well, I hope the relationship continues to be friendly and cooperative. I will say, just picking up on the H-1B subject, I think that's an indication of how this might or might not go. I worked in Silicon Valley for about 10 years, so I'm quite familiar with the effects of the H-1B program, which, in my opinion, were entirely positive. And I think this is one of those cases where ethnic nationalism, which drives Trump's political popularity, is so counterproductive. The reason there's so many H-1B visas granted is there's a demand waiting to be filled that can't be filled by enough American engineers and other technical experts. It's very similar to the jobs that are filled by Latin American immigrants, the laboring jobs in the fields, which for example, which I'm also familiar with living in this part of California. Again, unmet demand. And by cracking down in both ways, it actually causes economic damage in the United States. It would be nice to think that somehow going forward, the Trump administration would dial back the ethnic nationalism, which often just borders out on, tips over into just, naked racial hatred, including against Indians, often explicitly in the context of these H-1B visas. It would be nice to hope that they would dial that back and pursue the mutual benefits of a healthy economic trade partnership and defense partnerships, etc. I have to confess, as you can probably tell, I don't have really any confidence in President Trump or his administration, so I'm actually deeply concerned about all aspects of the future under this administration.
Right. Arnab, last word to you before we wrap up.
Spoken on the H-1B issue, and I came to the country on H-1B. Let me conclude with H-1B. So, opposition to H-1B traditionally has been from the protectionist wing of the US political spectrum. So that includes Bernie Sanders too. So if you find that there is almost an absolute congruence of opinions of Bernie Sanders and that wing of the MAGA base, which is amazing, right? Because they're two extremes, but they converge on this because, it's a circle. All the extremes ultimately come to that point. So with Trump, it is going to be very interesting because there is going to be a part of Trump's base, which is the, let's say, the Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, which is the tech bro Silicon Valley, who understand the need for the H-1B program. And then there is going to be the more Stephen Miller wing of the party, which is their main enemies are not really Mexican immigrants or illegal immigrants. It's always been H-1Bs because they see the H-1Bs as taking their jobs, while yes, they are picking cotton or they're doing the blowing leaves that they don't want to do, but Indians are writing C code, which is what they think they should be doing. So that has always been a very solid part of the Trump MAGA base, which amazingly has a great crossover with the Bernie base too. They approach it from a different point of view. It'll be very interesting. And we saw this dust up before with Vivek Ramaswamy's sudden exit from Doge and that tweet that he's basically made. So we've seen this tension already. And I think that one of the most interesting, there's two interesting things I will watch. One is that the fight between Elon Musk and Trump that is going to happen after some point of time, because they're two huge egos. And Time magazine very cleverly set that thing off. So it's been his mind, now it's up front. And the second is going to be, and that's I'm more interested in that part because of my Indian origins, is the battle between two wings of the MAGA base on H1.
MAGA and MIGA. I think we'll leave our viewers with that sound bite. But thanks so much, Michael Kugelman, Spencer Creasley, and Orno Bray for joining us today and for sharing your thoughts. Let's play that sound bite and before we wrap up.
India and the US can shape a better world. Friends, the people of America are aware of President Trump's motto, "Make America Great Again," or MAGA. The people of America are well aware of it. The people of India, too, are focusing on both heritage and development as they move forward at a fast pace and with a firm resolve to ensure a developed India by 2047. If I were to say this, borrowing an expression from America, our vision for a developed India is to make India great again, or MIGA. When America and India work together, that is, when it's MAGA plus MIGA, it becomes MEGA, a mega partnership for prosperity. And it is this mega spirit that
MAGA plus MIGA joins and it becomes MAGA. Thanks to all our viewers for joining us today, and thanks to all our panelists for coming in and for sharing their thoughts. Thanks for watching the Mojo Story.
It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.